You are listening to Kubernetes Bytes, a podcast bringing you the latest from the world of cloud-native data management. My name is Ryan Wallner, and I'm joined by Bhavin Shah, coming to you from Boston, Massachusetts. We'll be sharing our thoughts on recent cloud-native news and talking to industry experts about their experiences and challenges managing the wealth of data in today's cloud-native ecosystem. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. We're coming to you from Boston, Massachusetts. Today is June 13th, 2024. Hope everyone is doing well and staying safe. Let's dive into it. Bhavin, how you been, dude?
I've been good. Summer is here, and the Celtics are doing well, right? So I'm a bandwagon fan. Like I
Have you
haven't
gone to a
watched.
game?
Nope, not yet.
Oh, you should. You should. It's fun.
Yeah, like I looked at the prices for some of the playoffs games, and I'm like, nope, I can wait till the next regular season.
That's fair. You'll
but
probably go scalp a few, maybe.
yeah. Oh, yeah, that's a good idea. No, but yeah. So I'm just having fun. I think uh, having fun, like going out for walks, biking, things like that. So I don't know, how about you? I know you are having more adventures than I am.
Well, my ribs are healing pretty well. I
Nice.
think I think as of this week it's like 4 weeks, so it feels pretty good. I've started going back out mountain biking
Nice.
last week. I think for the first time, I went out for like 15 miles this morning, which felt great. As long as I'm not hitting the ground,
Yeah.
turns out it feels good. Otherwise, I got some plans later this summer to go up to New Hampshire and Maine and some other things that I'm looking forward to. You got any more national parks on your list?
No, I'm planning one in September, maybe
Okay.
doing Grand Teton, but yeah, nothing final yet.
Oh, okay. Well,
Yeah,
wow,
need to pack.
that's a big gap for you. I feel.
I know. Yeah, I have a camping trip in White Mountains, but yeah, not a national park, right? I need to do that.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Where are you going in the Whites?
Um, Franconia Notch. They have
Yeah.
a, yeah. I forgot what the name of the campground was, but just for a
No, that whole area is beautiful.
yeah.
Are you doing any of the big hikes, like the
I think that's
presidentials?
the plan. Yeah. So
Yeah,
like drive there Friday and
yeah,
then camp out, start a hike early morning Saturday. So we cover a lot of mileage and elevation, and then yeah, don't have to drive 2 hours back, right? So,
yeah.
uh,
I would go look at some the presidentials, the three in a row,
mhm.
or Adams.
Okay.
Washington's great, but like it's a whole thing. But
Yeah.
Adams is right next to it, and you can kind of like see it right next to it. So
Okay. Okay.
anyway, enjoy. I'll be up in the area at the end of this month, actually.
Okay. I
Just
think mine
below
is
it.
more in August. Yeah.
Nice. Well, you're gonna love it, I'm sure. Okay, well, today we have yet another AI topic, which is
I
exciting.
know.
I know there's a lot going on in the world of AI. Specifically, we're going to talk to someone from OpenShift. We will from Red Hat, and we will introduce him in just a minute. But before we do, let's dive into a bit of news. Bob, and why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, so for me, for some reason, Ryan, this was like a slow news week or a
I
couple
thought
of
so too.
weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah. So come on, guys, come on, vendors out there or projects, like announce something. But for me, it was just platform con was this week, right? So I didn't attend it live, but I know Luca and the team does a great job organizing them, and they have like great speakers. Uh, every year I miss it live, and then I go and watch the recordings. So we'll have a link to their YouTube channel and the playlist that they created for this year's 2024 Platform Con. I know they had some amazing speakers, so that's my plan as well, to just go and watch recordings. Hopefully, our listeners find some value there too.
Yeah, that's very cool. I know it's on my list of things to do to go look at all the recordings and find some good ones to watch as well. I mean, the big one for me was Kubernetes turned 10, I think,
Yeah,
between the last show and this show. And I mean, that's just quite an accomplishment. I think it's hard to believe that Kubernetes has been 10 years old since,
yeah,
what was it? Joe Beta first made his pull request, or maybe I'm getting those confused, but I think that was him. But yeah, 10 years goes fast.
yeah,
Speaking of all the things that have happened in the ecosystem, but it also kind of shows that how much stronger it is 10 years later
hmm,
and how much has been accomplished. And now we're building
yeah,
things on top of it. And most of what we're talking about in this show is now centered around what we can do with Kubernetes, not really
hmm,
about Kubernetes itself, although maybe we can get back to doing some more of that. So happy birthday, Kubernetes.
Nice.
We put a link to the YouTube video, like the happy birthday celebration, in the show notes as well.
Awesome. How long have you been working with Kubernetes? I think for me I started in 2019, so 5 years.
Yeah. Almost
I'm sure
from
you are longer than me. Like that's why
almost
I'm
from the
asking.
beginning, right? So
Okay. Okay.
so I think it was 2015 was when
Okay.
I first got involved. So 9, I
That's
guess
awesome.
nine of the 10. I remember
Okay.
I went to one of the very early KubeCons in Seattle, or maybe that was the first or second. I forget. It was hundreds of people,
Yeah.
which is wild to think about now. Yeah, it was fun. I think at the time we had the company I was working for, Cluster HQ. We had a customer in Europe who was running Kubernetes on top of OpenStack and using containers back in like 2015, 2016, which is like very cutting edge, and
Really bleeding
everything
edge.
broke
Yeah.
all the time. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've
That's awesome.
come a long way since that. All right, so my other one was I know we've talked about security a bunch on this show. I think Falco came out with a new release ever since getting added to the graduation in CNCF. I think this is the 0.38.0.
I would have assumed like if you graduated, you at least get to 1.0. But yeah, these zero.
or I don't know. I guess adding the 2 zeros is a lot. But regardless of what the release is, 0.38 is out and has a whole bunch of new capabilities in their CLI tool and their configuration file, and a whole bunch of other things like Prometheus metric support and plugin API improvements. So if you're into that project, I believe we talked about Falco specifically once, maybe in one of the high level episodes. I'll have to go back.
Oh yeah, high level for sure. I think we covered them in like the 4 C's Security 101 episode that we did.
Yeah, that might have been it. Yeah. So a lot of major features and improvements, I guess, for Falco. So go take a look at that. The other thing, since we've talked about on this show, was around sort of the whole Broadcom buying VMware thing. I know we've talked about Harvester. You've mentioned Harvester, and we're curious where people are going to go, whether it's KubeVirt on Kubernetes built by your homegrown, or is it KubeVirt on OpenShift with OpenShift virtualization? Rancher government chose specifically Harvester as their VM alternative and are really pushing that in their government space. So it kind of shows maybe people are starting to make these bigger product decisions and saying like, here's our direction. We're going to add a whole bunch of support and make this work really well. So I thought that was an interesting article to hear, especially in the government space, right? Where maybe there's more VMs than Greenfield or that kind of thing. So good stuff
you
there.
Know what's interesting? Like we see all this buzz around Broadcom VMware and like people moving over. I was just looking at the Broadcom earnings report from yesterday. They announced profits growth year over year. Their stock is up like 18%. They announced like a 10:1 split of the stock. Like they're doing well. Like it's just weird. Like okay, people are moving away, but Broadcom is making money.
Yeah, exactly. Some people are paying the big price tag at the end of the day. And the last piece of news here I had was from both our alma mater at this point, Portworx's partnership with Mirantis. So basically getting the Portworx data platform working with MKE to bring all the features and capabilities that are part of the Portworx Enterprise solution for storage, kind of baked in with Mirantis. So that's a cool article we'll put in the show notes as well. If you're on MKE or using Mirantis, I know I don't hear them and that platform very often in my day job, but it's really cool to see they're still making strides and doing some new things. Cool. So that is it. On to our guest for today. Again, we're going to be talking about OpenShift AI. We're going to start a little bit about sort of some background information and kind of dive in from there and get into OpenShift AI. But Andy Grimes will be on the show. He's a cloud services and emerging sales specialist, specifically in the AWS and AI space for Red Hat. And he's full of awesome information. And so I'm excited to get him on the show. So without further ado, let's get Andy on the show.
This episode is brought to you by our friends from NetHopper, a Boston based company founded to help enterprises achieve their cloud infrastructure and application modernization goals. NetHopper is ideal for enterprises looking to accelerate their platform engineering efforts and reduce time to market, reduce cognitive load on developers, and leverage junior engineers to manage and support cloud mandated upgrades for a growing number of Kubernetes clusters and application dependencies. NetHopper enables enterprises to jumpstart platform engineering with KAOPS, a cloud-native, GitOps-centric platform framework to help them build their internal developer platforms or IDPs. KAOPS is completely agnostic to the Kubernetes distribution or cloud infrastructure being used and supports everything including EKS, GKE, Rancher, OpenShift, etc. NetHopper KAOPS is also available on the AWS Marketplace. Learn more about KAOPS and get a free demo by sending them an email to info@nethopper.io or download their free version using mynethopper.com/auth.
All right, Andy, welcome to Kubernetes Bytes. Thank you for coming on the show. Why don't you give our listeners a little introduction of who you are and what you do?
Sure. My name's Andy Grimes. I'm currently the cloud services go-to-market lead at Red Hat. So I cover AWS, all things ROSA, though if you ask me questions on the other clouds, I do know how to spell them. I also am moonlighting as an AI expert, worked with WatsonX.ai on AWS that's now being delivered on ROSA, Red Hat OpenShift AI. And then recently we picked up Instruct Lab, IBM Granite models, and then also RHEL AI. And we can talk about those as we go through the discussions. But been an exciting time. Obviously, generative AI is a big thing, and we're all talking about it, no matter what our jobs are anymore.
Yeah.
No, and I don't think the moonlighting definition works for you, Andy. Like, I've seen you on LinkedIn and you are super active, even if you're not working on products, just tinkering with some of the tools that are out there. So yeah, that's the reason we have you on. Come on. You are an expert. Andy, like, I want to get this discussion started on some terminology, right? With Kubernetes, with containers, all of us should be familiar with the term DevOps. And how it's an iterative process for continuous improvement, delivering better applications on a day-to-day basis. But what do we mean by MLOps? There are a few different versions of the definition I have found, so I wanted to get your view on it. Like, what is MLOps and how is it different or similar to what DevOps is?
Sure. So obviously, I've been around AI off and on. Hilariously, way back in my academics, I took AI when it was listed under philosophy, which should tell you how old I am. But my first course in philosophy was actually taught with science fiction instead of classical Greeks. So my first degree is psychology with a minor in philosophy, and AI was dual listed, and we were doing Lisp programming way back when. And my first program was a robot vacuum cleaner, believe it or not. So, but I've touched on AI throughout my career, and especially the really interesting thing was AI when it really came out hot and heavy recently. It was really a lot of statistical analysis, which was right back to my psychology degree.
Right.
But what I've also seen is model training, whether it's machine learning or deep learning or now generative AI, is a very, very iterative process. So
Sure.
when we talk about cloud native and application development has become an extremely iterative process using a whole list of open source tools and products, and you get interesting stickers on your laptops from each of those open source tools for DevOps, which is really designed to, I like to say, screw up a lot and hide your mistakes. And the penultimate example is my phone needing to be updated by dozens and dozens of apps every day, which I actually don't like because Uber always needs to be updated while I'm walking across the airport trying to get an Uber. But
Nice.
MLOps is exactly the same. And in fact, that's what I saw this latest path. It was actually comical. Everybody said, AI is big again. I'm like, oh, good God, no. I've worked on too many products that failed in hype. But what I'm actually seeing with generative AI is something really, really interesting, which is it's actually generating things and has the potential to really deliver on the promise of AI that I've tried to do in jobs twice. Interestingly, I actually went to AWS to do AI there, and I went, yep, it's not ready back in 2019, 2020. But now what I'm seeing is generative AI is actually bringing tangible results. I mean, the joke is you can go look at, Chat GPT and it can fill out a term paper. And my wife asked me to download an app recently. I'd like to do homeschooling lesson plans from a generative AI, and she got a really good one out of it. So it's like, that's great, but that's not still an anger. I need to be able to customize that.
Yeah.
I need to be able to train it on my data. And so ML ops is really that operational process to take DevOps and apply it to data science, which is I get a model from somewhere, whether that's an NVIDIA pre-built model, an open source pre-built model, or now Granite, IBM Granite. I need to be able to do things to it, and that is going to be an iterative process. What data do I train it with? What do I do with it? What generation of the model am I using? And then somewhere I have to serve the model in that process. So there's a whole series of iterative steps that start to look a hell of a lot like DevOps. But in my mind, machine learning or ML ops is that process of creating a pipeline for prepping the data, training the model, testing the model, making sure it does what I want it to, and then managing the life cycle of that model. And then, oh, by the way, I'm going to build an app at the end of it that is very likely going to look like cloud native.
Yeah. So speaking of building that application, right? Are developers working the same way they always have in their companies, in their wherever they may be in their teams? Are they using these models sort of locally on their laptop? Or are they still using a typical DevOps pipeline that has sort of MLOps built into it that kind of shares access to a model? Like, how are you seeing that in the world?
It's been very interesting for me because back in 2019, I bought my NVIDIA JetBot. So I have my own GPU that I can drive around the house, and that was fun. I set it up to chase my daughter. And and I got cones to train it to do things, and then I find out my daughter's playing with the cones. So I think I'm my daughter. But the interesting thing is we've all kind of gone through this. I bought a GPU to have one at home to do it, and then I went to an NVIDIA conference to actually learn how to program robots. Yeah. And so that was interesting using Gazebo, but it all came down to where can I get a GPU from?
Sure.
When I was in that class, it was hilarious. It was full of Navy drone programmers with Alienware gaming laptops for the GPU. And so that's what I've kind of seen is just as DevOps is a very laptop centric, you can kind of experiment in a local environment and then deploy it into Podman is what we use versus Docker. And then you're able to put it on a local Kubernetes. And then I can simulate that publishing out into, when I go to war with the application out in the world. AI is doing exactly the same thing. When generative AI came out, we're now downloading the models locally, and we have an amazing product called Podman AI Lab that actually has a pre-built list of models, and you can literally go in, select the model, and it'll do a front end to the back end and let you test the model locally on your laptop.
No, Podman AI Lab is awesome. Like I think they also have like the chatbot scenario where you don't have to build your own RAG system, right? Like you just upload your PDFs inside Podman UI, and it just gives you a chatbot.
Yep. So, and that's the coolest thing to me is you can actually take a document, upload it into, and then chat with your document.
Yeah.
Rather than know what it is. And the extreme case is I can feed that large language model my emails and ask my emails what I'm supposed to be doing today. But it's probably about the least secure thing you could possibly do.
Yeah.
Which is why people are running them locally. So I actually just got off a call with a multinational that said, absolutely, we want a POC Granite. It used to be in our environment because any data we feed it makes it confidential. But getting back to your question, we are absolutely doing things with local laptops. I tested a model and it was funny. We got a hold of IBM Merlinite, the Merlinite model, and I immediately typed in, set up a local instance with Podman AI Lab. Typed in the name of my products and said, hey, marketing, do you know what my products are?
Yeah.
And it didn't. So I actually went back to marketing and said, you guys are missing the large language model constituency in your targets. But then I was actually able to use Instruct Lab to go train the model to actually know what my products were, and did that in time for our conference. So I experimented with it locally on a laptop. I do have a local GPU that's pretty anemic, so I was taking 5 to 10 minutes to get in. Where that's where I see everybody's playing with them locally now, because uploading my data to ChatGPT is not working for anybody anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
And the Apple announcement yesterday was the worst. Hey, we're going to put it on your phone, but don't worry, I'm feeding it all of my information. That's pretty scary. So we definitely see this DevOps like model where it's like I'm experimenting with the model locally, I'm keeping control of the data, I'm keeping control of the model that I output.
Yeah,
But
and there's definitely a middle ground there too, right? Where maybe it's not individually because you need a GPU to actually do that securely and locally, but maybe organizations or companies are doing, build your own sort of internal SaaS access to a model, and it doesn't go out to the internet, and it's trained on internal data. Maybe there's that middle ground too, that you don't have a GPU necessarily that you want to run because it's anemic on your laptop, your developer laptop, for whatever reason, but your company could provide you one as well that's trained.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I've been excited by. What we've announced lately was Instruct Lab is a new taxonomy for training models that's faster and open to people, and it's an open source project that we actually IBM and Red Hat released. But I actually use that to go train a model very, very quickly with minimal amounts of data on exactly what my product names should output. And I was able to get that model updated before our conference so that people, of course, are immediately asking what my product is. But I had a fun one where I downloaded Llama 3 and started playing with it and asked it what a popular IBM product was, and it started making up really interesting stuff. And being able to experiment with that locally and quickly get an answer was very valuable.
But then, Andy, like when you're talking to your customers, right? Do you see a trend where if developers are trying to build applications while running models locally using Podman AI Labs or Olama or something like that, they are maybe opting for like smaller parameter models, like the instead of using the Llama 70B, I'm using Llama 8 billion parameter locally, and then somehow in my application I have a way to flip it to the larger, more accurate model or more the model that's trained on higher parameters when it goes into production. Do you see that happening?
We're seeing right now. There's just a lot of experimental discussions, and I've been playing with WatsonX.ai back since September, and it's been interesting because I can fire it up. I get an internal copy, and it's like Llama 3 dropped. 10 minutes afterwards, was able to put it in a studio and start training it with prompts. But what I really love is being able to compare it to different models. And if you go look in Podman AI Lab, you have the same capability. You can try different models with the same structure very, very quickly, just by rebooting an app in that case. So that ability for developers to go, how is Llama doing? How is Granite doing?
Okay.
And the differentiation on Granite that's interesting is IBM actually went out of their way. We will tell you exactly what data is in it. And more importantly, they'll indemnify you if you use the Granite models to build applications, which is huge for business. So, and then they came to us and we outsourced the Granite family jointly to open source. So that's one of the things that's been kind of fun. But getting back to your question, the big thing I'm seeing with customers, and we just talked to one, which is we're trying to figure this generative AI thing out. We need to make it business safe, but we need to rapidly experiment with multiple models. In my case, I had the same problem where, of course, I started looking at gaming laptops and looking at GPU options. And that size of the model, that number of parameters and tokens is a huge factor in how much RAM it consumes. So after spending an agonizing weekend trying to find the right GPU cost combination with a laptop, somebody finally said you need to use an NVIDIA AGX. And it has 64 gigabytes of RAM that is shared with the GPU, which is more than any of the gaming laptops you can realistically get. So it's now I have a $2,000. My wife thinks it costs $200, but I have a $2,000 thing sitting on my desk.
Accidentally left off a zero. No big deal.
I can put any size model on.
Interesting. I didn't know about the AGX series, so that's something that I'll definitely look up.
Yep, it's the AGX Orin, and in fact, one of the SSAs I work with at Red Hat, he's hacking RHEL AI on it. So we have our own Granite series models and Instruct Lab and everything there so that I can have a local copy to run all the time. And everybody's like, you're a cloud guy. Why aren't you running it on cloud? I'm like, because I have to pay for that. But no, what we're seeing with customers, though, is they start out with like, I'm not sure which model I want to use. Granite has a lot of advantages because of the indemnification in business settings. But like ChatGPT was excited, but I usually see people kind of go, I know you can make a term paper with this, but anything I generate, I might get sued on.
Yeah.
And so the big one is like the one that IBM always cites is like if you create a HR resume filtering bot, and this has happened, they have trained it with resumes they've hired and trained in gender bias. And now you're creating a lawsuit exposure. And so that's one of the things that's kind of the other side of this is generative AI has done some amazing things and we're bringing AI into generating new content. But now we're also creating liability that we didn't realize. So
In-
that continuum of experimenting locally, now I'm putting my data and my intellectual capital into it and creating a confidential instance. And then at the end of the process where I'm developing an ML ops pipeline, I need to be able to prove what was put into it, what did I do with it, and where is it generating business.
No, so Andy, like I think based on your last comment, right? You said there are scenarios where bias is getting introduced, and I think I was at one of the sessions at Red Hat Summit where they were talking about Apple, the credit card they started working with Goldman Sachs. It was actually really biased towards your race and ethnicity on who gets approved for an Apple card and who doesn't. Uh, how do you avoid these scenarios, right? Like how do you make sure? How do you identify that there is bias, and then how do you look at your raw data or whatever data you're training it on to make sure you're removing it? Like are there tools out there that can help make this better?
Yeah, the one I'm most familiar with, and I know there's an open source equivalent that the name escapes me at the moment, but Watson X Governance happens to be the piece of it. And Watson X Governance is actually pretty interesting. Part of what got me kind of thinking about AI again, because everybody said, "Hey, do you want to do AI?" And like, not a chance. And it's been funny, but it's like I did actually a prior Kubernetes product that had, we signed an OEM with NVIDIA and then they killed the product on me. So I'm kind of like, I'm not going down that road too far. But I did have a CTO at a customer tell me it's like Watson X Governance is going to be the key piece of adoption
Mm-hmm.
because it allows businesses to create audit trails.
Mm-hmm.
And it's pretty straightforward. It takes your model card from Hugging Face or one that IBM provides for Granite. You know what you're putting into it, good, bad, or indifferent, but then you can create a process. Here's the data I used to train it. Here's the process of who audited it. And it has checks. And one of them they mentioned was a state government actually having an external audit capability to come in and check it. And then I actually asked internally because we do trusted software supply chain, which is
Mhm.
creating SBOMs when we do the DevOps process.
Mhm.
And I said, don't I need the same thing for models?
Yeah.
And they said, yep, that's what Watson X does. And by the way, Watson X Governance does it with any model source. So it runs in with Bedrock and it runs with the Chat GPT models. So it's really more of a framework for auditing. It does have some checks in it to detect, PII information. But at the end of the day, what it's doing is when I build that application, it's spitting everything, that model card and all of the facts about what you did in that generation of the model and what you built into your application.
Mm-hmm.
So that gives you an auditability trail to say, look, we had our due diligence if it picked up a problem. But the extreme example we had was they did some hiring in India and they used one of these filtration and they picked up the caste system, which is a massive legal vulnerability there. And so that's something that, when you use these generative AI technologies in business, you're going to have problems. But just as we have SBOM requirements now coming out of the DevOps and cloud native, we're going to see exactly the same thing with models very, very quickly.
Yeah.
And-
Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead, Ryan.
Okay. I mean, I think there was another example I heard recently of, healthcare companies using it to like approve and deny claims. And, you're hoping that, those decisions by whatever model is making the decisions are being reviewed and, scarily enough, they're probably also being reviewed by yet another model or something like that. But yeah, it makes you wonder, right? That are we able to catch these things with these governance tools and sort of actions within these, as well as we have with humans doing the work, or hopefully better, right?
Yeah, I got to see an interesting view, and I don't mean to be over-rotated on IBM. We are a subsidiary of it.
Sure.
That is very, very independent. But I did attend an IBM Watson X events here in Raleigh, North Carolina, where I live. And one of the CTOs for IBM Customer One, which is IBM internal IT, actually said that's their biggest problem is detecting hallucinations in this technology.
Yeah.
You need to have something reviewing the data that can actually tell you when it's making stuff up, because it'll make up really good stuff.
Really convincing things.
And that's turning into, and he said the most hilarious thing I'd ever heard, which was, we finally found a use case for quantum computing. It's to check for hallucinations. I was actually laughing because when I was at AWS, I ran into a guy. I was working on an AWS storage service that doesn't have the best reputation. And it was hilarious because we had to get on a customer call where they were doing through three different grep commands in the same command as they were like building out this long command. And it was like generating massive latency on every get at her. So I was laughing, and the guy gets in and like rewrites her code. And I said, "You're great. Well, just out of curiosity, why are you working on this particular thing?" And he says, "I have a degree in quantum computing, and this pays better." So I still like finally thought that during it, which is like we found a use case for quantum computing, which is to go check our models to make sure we know whether or not they're hallucinating on us. Because that's going to be the biggest risk, is because they're good enough now to actually make up good stuff. And are we smart enough to know? So the joke is, I run an internal chat service now, but I don't want to ask it any questions. I don't have a pretty good idea of what the answer should be.
Yeah. Turns out we just created a bunch of really good liars, right?
Yeah.
So you mentioned before about, building these models and kind of how developers are starting to use them. Are you finding that organizations are kind of pulling models off the shelf, the Chat GPTs or Whisper or any other ones from OpenAI, or are you finding that organizations are definitely more interested in building their own or kind of building off of open source projects that allow them to kind of build out their use case without using sort of an off the shelf foundational model?
Sure. So part of why I came to Red Hat is I just love the whole open source paradigm. I worked with a previous technology that was, not liked. And after doing a lot of meetings with, we hate them, but we'll use you long enough to help us get away from them. Versus during a lot of those discussions, people were literally like, but we love Red Hat. And so I kind of came to Red Hat. I live in Raleigh, so I get to go to the tower every day. But the way we treat open source is pretty wild. People are like, what's your roadmap for your product? It's right there on GitHub.
Yeah.
You don't
go look at it.
Confidential. So, but the interesting thing is, my friends have asked me, like, how do you sell free? And the answer is, I make it boring. Because the business, it's like we're harnessing the power of open source and then shaving off the sharp edges and giving it to people. And ironically, I was at the NVIDIA conference in DC a few years ago, and I ran into a Red Hat evangelist, and this was a good 5 years ago or something. And I said, "How do you evangelize this?" He's like, "We wait until it's boring and then we talk about it." But that said, open source is really big in financial services and government, and Red Hat is the way that they consume it.
Yeah.
And so most of the customers I talk to love the power of open source, but they also want that safety net.
Gotcha.
And an article yesterday that was kind of hilarious, which is AI needs a Red Hat. Which is somebody to go deal with that herd all the cats of open source and take all those people who are coding things at midnight with 3-liter Mountain Dews and doing that for free. And so that's where I think AI really is, which is there's a huge group of people who like the open source models, and you can go out and Hugging Face and find a model to do anything. And that's actually something that I've said internally, is that open source has taken over AI in a way that hasn't been up to now. And so we're kind of metastasizing the capabilities. But what I see customers doing is they're experimenting with the open source ones, and then they're starting to realize the liabilities that are creeping in. And when I saw IBM Granite come out with liability and their indemnification clause, I was like, that's huge. And then I saw them as an ex-storage guy, all the things they did to prep the data, to identify the data, and all the things they did to keep bad data out. So I'm kind of seeing that split where people are okay with open source, but then they start realizing the more important the application, the more important it is that they be able to actually identify the sources of things.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
I definitely find that, like, this age of open source in AI, and it's not just the models, right? I think, Bhavin, we had a conversation a few weeks ago with folks about sort of how it's also open data sets, it's open embeddings, it's all these other things. And it's definitely shining a different perspective, a different light on the importance of data. I think for a while now, we've been saying data is gold, but to the public that hasn't necessarily been fully understood. And now when we're kind of feeding it into these models that are making decisions, people are like, oh, I think I get it now, to a certain extent.
I saw a very interesting demo, and again, it was a Watson X, just because I get a free GPU whenever I fire up Watson X.
There you
but
go.
I was, okay, there's new like AI standards for EMEA. Oh God, I don't want to read that doc. So you just upload it into the chat bot and talk to it. And it's like the model that interprets that is actually pretty important.
Yeah.
No, I don't want the same model that my wife is using to generate a lesson plan for my daughter's homeschool
Sure.
that I'm using to understand the legal liability. And so
Yep.
that's where we're kind of seeing that differentiate out. But I'm loving the experimental nature. And like what I've got from an open source perspective is I've got Podman AI Lab. We released Instruct Lab and we put it out in the wild immediately.
Mhm.
Rel AI is already in public preview. So there's a GitHub, you can download all the parts and build it
Yeah.
yourself. But as soon as you start doing things in anger, you need it to be predictable and kind of boring. But
Gotcha.
where we see OpenShift AI and Watson X kind of come together, it's like, let's build this in anger that we can, build business around it.
Okay. And Andy, before we switch gears and talk about model development, right? I know you already mentioned something about OpenShift AI. One more question, right? As part of application development workflow, like we see as part of usual development processes, people will have canary deployments, blue-green deployments. They might try out do some A/B testing with different versions of the application, and then if it's a newer update, they'll switch if they see favorable results. Do you see that happening, or people planning for that with different versions of a model or different flavors of a model? Like I'll take like a Mistral model and a Granite model with my same application code, see which one performs better, see which one has less bias, and then maybe choose a model. Like how are people, like, do you see this happening in the real world?
Big time. And that's one of the advantages of cloud native is you can, in OpenShift AI, you can host a model and actually serve it with API access.
Okay.
So I have a web front end, just change the back end and, go to this model, go to that model, just by changing the API it's calling. So that ability to really do two things. You can do blue-green with the back end model. You can do different types of models on the
Mhm.
back end, and you can more importantly do different trainings.
Okay.
A friend of mine in the storage industry said one of the big differentiators in storage in these models is today it takes 10 minutes to reload a model every time they do a new generation, which that's a developer sitting idle. And if they're doing a lot of training tuning,
Yeah.
that's a lot of time they're wasting. And especially if you're renting the GPU by the hour, which is, that's the other one fun thing is Bitcoin as being converted to GPUs,
Yeah.
managed service providers. And so that time to get to it and to get multiple generations is powerful. But I set up, I actually have a case, it's out on my GitHub to do a model serving backend, and it's ResNet 18 for image classification and a Gradio front end. And I can scale the front end as broadly as I need to, and I can scale the back end independently. And I can even put auto scaling. But because I can put a webhook in every time I change the model, I can rebuild the app automatically.
Oh, that's awesome.
Really powerful. But I do the same thing with even Podman AI Lab. It allows you to change models quickly and compare results.
Okay.
But on our OpenShift AI Roadshow, that's actually what we show you is two different models and typing in text and comparing them and then potentially tuning them.
Okay, nice. So now let's talk about OpenShift AI, right? Like, what is OpenShift AI first of all, and how does it help me if I'm building my own models from scratch or doing some retraining or fine tuning for any open source models?
So the interesting thing is the open source model in my mind has been taking over.
Yeah.
Obviously, NVIDIA is extremely key with their differentiation in the GPU market, but there are others. All the hyperscalers have their own models. We have Intel, we have AMD, and we have other model GPU accelerators that are coming out. But the key thing there is the GPU technology is extremely important and will manage what you're doing. But a lot of times it's a collection of open source technologies. It's PyTorch and it's Kubeflow and it's now the latest is Ray and many of the other ones that are coming. We created an open source upstream project called Open Data Hub.
Mm-hmm.
And you go look at that, and that's one of those projects that Red Hat curates, and that's our public free version that you can get access to, and that's where we've prototyped the tools for an ML ops pipeline.
Okay.
And so what's interesting is OpenShift AI is the boring version. It's the enterprise predictable, and you can consume that over OpenShift, and you can do it in data centers, in AWS, in Azure, and in Google. And what OpenShift AI does is we take all those open source projects and basically give you the ability to, a little bit of data preparation. That's not necessarily the key, but a lot of it is about hosting the model, training the model. You decide where you get the model from.
Mm-hmm.
You now have a special relationship with IBM Granite, but you can go to Hugging Face and get any model you want, or Olama or a bunch of other different places, or bring your own model. But what it's designed for is to create that ML ops platform for data scientists to use so that when they get on it, they're working with the data science tools and not understanding the Kubernetes implementations, because
Okay.
data scientists shouldn't be Kubernetes experts.
Sure.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay,
Sorry,
so like in the past, right, I've seen demos at KubeCons around the Kubeflow tool where data scientists at the end of the day care about like a Jupyter Lab environment or a TensorFlow environment. They don't care about how those resources are provisioned as long as the notebook environment has those resources available to it.
yep.
OpenShift AI also solves for that as part of the MLOps pipeline.
Yeah, and so for example, you want like a very large telco company wants their data scientists to show up and have the exact same experience every single time.
Mm-hmm.
And when the code upgrade comes, there's a code package that upgrades that whole piece in that pipeline in one shot. It's exactly the model of OpenShift, where it's like I can literally take OpenShift and go out to a GitHub and it'll look at the code and figure out how to build it. But when I upgrade OpenShift, it's everything. You don't have to go pick bits and pieces and parts. So we like to say OpenShift is Kubernetes code ready.
Mm-hmm.
Literally upload code to it. And then OpenShift AI is supposed to do the next level up for data scientists. Bring your model, bring your data, and then you're able to actually build your pipelines to do the multiple generations and experimentation and flows. But the idea is 30 data scientists can use the same tools, but 100 data engineers have access to the scalable piece. But right underneath that, you are fully integrated with your app platform,
Mm-hmm.
so that your apps that you're going to consume this and deliver
Right.
this back to your business are all fully integrated. So when you grab a generation of a model, you can, exactly what you're getting on the DevOps side.
Right.
So that integration is actually key, because if I look at the hyperscalers, for example, I have a completely different implementation in each cloud, because
Mm-hmm.
they've all gone into a managed service. So one cloud will have one version, another cloud will have another, and those data scientists become basically bred to that ecosystem.
Yeah.
Whereas with OpenShift, and I actually had this when I worked at AWS, it was like we needed to do a solution that ran in all three clouds and had to be identical.
Right.
I ended up with three radically different Kubernetes implementations. And it's the same thing with the data science tools. You
Yeah.
want your data scientists to be portable, because there may be different reasons for them to operate.
So are you finding that, the way that I guess teams are consuming OpenShift AI is that you sort of have a data science team that kind of and an MLOps team that kind of manages the building, the training, and those kind of things, and then make that model resource or API endpoint to that model available to the developers also on OpenShift, and kind of like just access permissions wise that this namespace now has access to this newly trained model or something like that.
Yeah, the OpenShift AI workflow is actually pretty cool, that it actually has a model hosting and serving, so it can create, and we do this with VLLM locally in Podman
Okay.
AI Lab, but we can do the same thing. Same capabilities are built into OpenShift AI. So after you've trained your model and your model spits out, you can just host it for the application there.
Got it.
So your
Okay.
developer can immediately access it. But if you do need ultra high performance, you can build that model into an image as well. But
So
having model serving built into
yeah.
the MLOps workflow really simplifies the developer integration.
Got it. So is the way that models are sort of stored? I mean, we're familiar with like a Quay registry or a Docker registry or something like that. Is our models saved or in its own type of registry in a container, or can they be stored separately somewhere else in an object store? Or something?
Today, we don't have a model registry. It's on our roadmap.
Okay.
So that's one what we do want to do for exactly that reason. But for example, Rosa is what I work with in my day job. We support the container registries in AWS, but we also support GitHub.
Yeah.
Okay.
We can store things wherever we need to. Models today we typically host on local storage,
Sure.
Okay.
but we get them from Hugging Face.
Yeah.
Or whatever source of model you want to use.
Mhm.
But down the road, the plan is for us to have a model registry built in.
Okay.
Got it.
Okay, makes sense. And as part of the pipeline, right? Like again, I'm trying to draw parallels with Kubeflow because that's the tool that I'm familiar with. Uh, Kubeflow allows you to create your own DAGs or directed acyclical graphs and define a pipeline with different stages and run experimentation and hyperparameter tuning. If I'm an OpenShift shop today, or if I want to like use that with OpenShift AI, does it allow me to do hyperparameter tuning or experimentation on OpenShift AI and iterate through over my model?
Yeah, so the workflow's built in. It even has a graphical representation of it. That's pretty cool, but it can show you the steps of what you're doing to train and test the model, and how you're putting it through the process. And there's some flexibility to extend some of that, those training and audit checks. The important thing though is we really want to help them. They have Jupyter, so they have all the flexibility of Jupyter to bring in other tools, and we can layer things over the top of it through the underlying OpenShift. What I like to think of is like WatsonX.ai is pretty fun for me because it really is a tuning studio without Jupyter. I don't
Okay.
need the code is. I could literally add and remove. Like Llama 3 came out, I fired up WatsonX, and a data scientist can use it without knowing what the hell it's doing in the background. So that's the turnkey version.
Right.
But I still have Jupyter if I need to go and do what's called composable AI, which is I want the frameworks, but I need to get my fingers inside of it. So I actually did just talk to a customer, and that's exactly what they wanted. Their data scientists want to experiment quickly. And it's like, okay, we can definitely do that. Let's get you set up on WatsonX immediately, which is exactly how I use it to rapidly experiment. At some point, my data engineers, my data scientists, and most importantly, my application teams need to get their fingers into the process and maybe customize it for their use case. Maybe they've got people that are, you're using NVIDIA, but maybe you want to use Intel GPUs. Or in the latest, which has been fascinating for me, is all three hyperscalers are like, you immediately need to support our GPUs.
Yeah.
So being able to swap out GPU libraries is actually going to be a big factor going forward.
Interesting. Okay.
But what I'm seeing from it is that idea that they have the same tools everywhere they go. And getting back to that hilarious example, I was working with a very, very large AWS strategic customer, and they had relationships with all three clouds. They had a mandate to use EKS, AKS, and GKE. And I ended up with a whole stack of solutions underneath it because it was replacing a Hadoop stack. So I ended up with all these open source things that we were cramming into Kubernetes to talk object to an EMR or a Hadoop cluster. But I was like, good God, I wish I had a standard Kubernetes set that had the same tools everywhere. That would have been OpenShift.
Yeah.
And then, I needed a standard data layer for a data lake. That's actually something called WatsonX Data. That was exactly the open source projects we would have used. But when you get to the data science stack, and incidentally, what that customer had was SolarWinds logs. So I got a call, good God, can you get me my SolarWinds logs now? It's like, yes, we can. But they built a data science stack to go over those logs and look for what their exposures were.
Right.
But getting back to what's really interesting to me, though, is like open source is already kind of taking over this process where IBM Research went to OpenShift AI because of the open source flexibility of the components. And then they've built many of the WatsonX components in open source. And then this weird relationship was IBM said, we want to upstream those because we want the open source community to have access to it. So Red Hat is inserted into the WatsonX process by upstreaming things for IBM. And then Granite has followed that model, and now InstructLab has followed that model. So it's really been kind of a tail wagging the dog for us. But to me, it just confirms that open source is really the right way forward with AI.
Makes sense. Now, speaking of, before you mentioned sort of the big hyperscaler saying support this GPU now, assuming OpenShift AI has no problem running both on-prem and in the cloud, how does it sort of work with the challenges around consumption of more GPUs when you're sort of scaling out, or how often do you see sort of these Gen AI applications have the need to scale out and add more GPUs, and how does that sort of work together with OpenShift AI?
Sure. And I have exactly the same problem myself, which is I can go to AWS and check out a GPU and fire it up in a few minutes. And internally, one of our engineers was funny. He has a single node OpenShift that he can fire up for a couple hours to rent a GPU. But a few years ago, I worked with a Kubernetes engine, and I created a bunch of NVIDIA GPUs in AWS. And it said, yes, I deleted them. And 2 days later, I get a $300 bill because it told me it did. But what I like about cloud is hourly. I can check out what I need, I can use it for when I need to, and I can check back out. So when I look at OpenShift AI and ROSA, that's what I love, is that hourly capability to add workers. So it's set up to automatically scale out as demand. So you just put health checks on the workers where the GPUs are. And if it sees them getting overloaded, it'll automatically add more, as long as you've got that ability enabled and you've got that access to them. The big problem I find right now is the biggest GPUs are heavily constrained in the cloud.
Yeah, sure.
So, but the problem with on-prem, of course, is you got to buy 3 years worth of garbage, gear. You think I call it meat space, actually, but you've got to buy 3 years worth of hardware, typically in one shot, the way on-prem budgeting works. So you're kind of building the Taj Mahal and hoping that you need it. Whereas cloud, I can rapidly experiment and then I like to call it hide the bodies if it didn't work. So OpenShift AI allows you to standard framework, but you can scale the GPUs in and out as needed in the cloud. And that's what's really valuable to me. The other thing is we integrate with the other tools available in the clouds. So your developers have a home base.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They can go work in another cloud and use whatever their unique capabilities are.
Does ROSA or OpenShift AI do anything special in terms of like knowing or sort of probing, these hyperscalers to know if a GPU set is available for scaling before it tries, or would you only find that out if like you're using a particular sort of type of accelerator and you go to scale and it's like, nah, not available, sorry bro.
You typically define a machine set, and as long as you give it parameters, how what's the minimum and what's the maximum to that worker set, and then ROSA will take advantage of scaling it out itself. And incidentally, as a managed service, there are actually Red Hat SREs managing it with an SLA. So I always get that question from customers. I want to customize it. No, you don't, because I own the SLA.
Okay.
Yeah, the moment you customize it, you own it.
Yeah, we're not letting you screw us up, which is, that's hilariously like when I worked with AWS, I had customers say, I want to run this storage operating system, but I don't want to tell anybody what it is. It's like, that's a managed service. I want it to be a black box so my security people don't look at it. That's what we see with ROSA and OpenShift AI on ROSA is it's kind of a black box managed service for them on AWS, so that their security people don't have to go check everything under the covers, but their developers are just consuming a standardized service. But in terms of the GPUs, you can give it rules to expand as long as you have access to those GPUs from the hyperscaler. One of like the P4DE worker at AWS, you have to sign up for a year in advance to get it.
Mm-hmm.
So those are constrained resources, which dictate a lot of things with customers. Interestingly, I find people come to us and be like, hey, we'd like to work with you with OpenShift AI. We've got P4DEs because they've already got the GPUs, but now they want to use us to maximize the time they get out of those GPUs because they don't have to assemble everything from scratch. It's all turnkey right after they're booted or pretty close.
Nice. Makes sense.
And so like as part of this discussion already you have been sprinkling like customer scenarios and use cases, right? Like I know as part of every episode we do a second last question around like how are customers actually using this? Are there specific stories that you wanted to share, public or private references around how people are already using OpenShift AI as part of their workflows to build these MLOps pipelines?
Sure. We have a few public examples. One of the big ones is Boston Children's Hospital is using OpenShift AI for a CRISPR DNA analysis. I'm not familiar with all the details. There's an excellent series of videos out there, but that's one where we worked and partnered with them on using OpenShift AI to rapidly facilitate a DNA project that uses GPUs.
Yeah.
Again, and it maximizes the value of those GPUs. Our second headquarters is in Boston, so Boston University is another big customer that's public. We did a VA program to identify from chat logs and chat information. Veterans' exposure to suicide was another public project. So those are kind of the ones we could really talk about publicly. The ones I'm getting questions about, and I just had a fascinating one, which is a customer called me and said, we want to run Code Assist in AWS with Watson X Code Assist because I want my developers to have help. I want, we actually have a public use case of 60% of content for Ansible can be created by a Code Assist. So they built basically a support system for their developers to be more efficient to modernize applications. And so now they're like, well, where are we going to put those apps? It's like, well, look, there's OpenShift right next to it.
Yeah.
Okay, so you can manage the generations and that has its own ability to accelerate. Then they called me up and said, good God, we want to get off of Broadcom. I have 20,000 VMs. And I said, doesn't that look like technical debt that you can feed to that app pipeline? Yeah. And I said, let's not just try to, I call it dirty laundrying or giving a junkie a fix, which is let's keep feeding the VMs that you probably shouldn't be on anymore anyway. Let's give them an 8-lane highway to app modernization and cloud native, especially if you're going to run it in the cloud. Yeah. So that's where I'm seeing is Code Assist and AI and generative AI is actually this really interesting opportunity is modernizing technical debt applications by accelerating the developer experience. The most interesting one is COBOL.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Assistance that you can feed the code base.
So many people know COBOL, so I don't
Yeah.
know why you'd need it.
Unfortunately, I did. And I'm like, no, I don't want to do that. But I actually did pull up Watson X and put in some COBOL examples, and it spit out examples of it like converted to Python into other languages.
Yeah.
So that's actually, I have visibility to a lot of our generative AI opportunities, and that's what we're seeing is a lot of application modernization.
So someone like yourself, knows how to interact with something like Code Assist. Are you finding that these companies who call you and ask and say, "I want Code Assist so my developers, can work more quickly, produce this Ansible," are those developers also how much, I guess, is also being asked about how do you train those developers to use something like Code Assist or a model efficiently for their workflow? I imagine some of them probably will catch on to it naturally, some of them may not, right? Depending on
Yep.
what they're familiar with.
We're seeing, and it's a public reference, as Delta Airlines uses ROSA to rapidly stand up an environment. And the hilarious thing about OpenShift that most people don't understand is I can publish desktops out of it.
Yeah, sure.
So the developers get the standard VS Code desktop every single time. So our onboarding for developers there is 20 days or so.
Yeah.
Because they get the same ones. Well, giving them
Nice.
a assist absolutely helps with that if they're kind of conditioned to use it. But you're usually giving them a generic code assist, which for new projects is typically okay.
Yeah.
In that case, they did the free Wi-Fi system for Delta Airlines was rapidly developed because the developers had a standardized tool set. For legacy code, that's where I think it falls down. If you've got a big COBOL base, it's probably pretty unique by now. You're not going to get a generic code assist or copilot or what have you to know what it is. You're going to have to train it. And that's where I think generative AI is going to have a bigger workflow, but it's also going to give you a bigger benefit because a new project, help on the new project is definitely of value, but getting out of all that technical debt is really more important.
Got it. Makes sense. Well, speaking of learning and how to do things, I'd love for you to just give, I know we'll include as many references of what we talked about today, videos and such, or Instruct Lab and all those things in the show notes. But if you can give a brief sort of intro about where people can go to learn more, listeners specifically, maybe how they contact you or where they go to get started, that'd be super helpful.
Sure. My email is agrimes@redhat.com. I'd be happy to refer you to the right thing. What's fun about Red Hat is everything's public on GitHub. There are GitHub projects. Open Data Hub is out there for the OpenShift AI pieces. We also have road shows you can attend. So if you'd like to get hands-on with OpenShift AI, the road shows are being delivered. I think Bellevue, Washington, I just posted a little while ago on LinkedIn, but you can hit me up on LinkedIn and we post most of our sessions there. Instruct Lab is an open source project where you can go download it and run it locally to do model tuning. Podman AI Lab is available to start running models locally. And then, if you'd like to get involved, to get a hold of ROSA, there's a free 24-hour trial you can take advantage of or talk to your account teams. But what I love about open source is everybody has access to the free versions at any time. And then my job is to find out when you need to make it boring. We'll give you links to most of these, but the road shows, we are doing a virtual game day jointly with AWS August 22nd. So I'll try to get you guys the invitation for that. But it's hilarious when I talk to people at AWS. They're all open source people. They all love working with open source, and we've all cut our teeth on these things over the years. So it's kind of a fun space.
Cool. Well, Andy, it's been a pleasure. I know I've learned a lot, and I have a bunch of to-dos on my end to go research some stuff and play with Podman AI Lab and Instruct Lab myself. I'm looking forward to that. Hopefully we'll have you on again sometime. I know this is a fast-moving space, and it seems like you're in the thick of it, so we'll definitely make a time to talk to you again, but it was a pleasure to have you on the show.
Awesome. Thank you. Appreciate the time.
All right, Bhavin, that was a fun conversation with Andy. He's quite a character and full of information. I would love to hear sort of your takeaways from that conversation.
No, I agree, right? Like Andy is full of energy. Like I've met him a couple of times in person. Last time was at Red Hat Summit in Denver. Yeah, he's always like this. It was not just for the hour that we recorded with him. He's always full of energy and always tinkering with things, right? So if you follow his LinkedIn, you will always see him posting about things that he's trying out. So I was glad that he was able to share some of his early experiments that he did with like the Instruct Lab and the Granite models and things like that. But from a takeaways perspective, I think the discussion that we had around OpenShift AI and how there is the open source part of it called the Open Data Hub and the different modules that it has, something called InstaScale. and how OpenShift AI leverages it, right? So let's say you are running it on AWS and you deployed a training job, but your cluster didn't have enough GPUs.
Yeah.
Scale will recognize the need for more GPU power, find the instances if they are available, and then automatically scale your cluster. So uh, again, the value here is the data scientists or whoever is doing the model training work don't have to open up tickets. Even when they're running in the cloud, they can just let the platform stack that they're running automatically expand the infrastructure to meet their needs. So there are some of those nuances, right? Like that really help you do your job easily rather than having to worry about the infrastructure. So OpenShift AI feels like that complete solution. And I know Andy mentioned a few times that, oh, this is the consistent stack everywhere. So if you're running on-prem, running in AWS or Azure or Google Cloud, you get the same features everywhere.
Yeah.
That's just an OpenShift advantage that Red Hat is now extending with OpenShift AI. So it's a pretty neat tool. I think when I was at Portworx, I did deploy it, got access to a Jupyter Lab instance really quickly. All the plumbing that was needed under the covers, like the CPU memory resources, the storage resources, everything is at the end of the day running on OpenShift clusters. So it was super easy. But yeah, it's a cool product, and if you have access to it, something that listeners should definitely try out.
Yeah, I mean, I think I mentioned or asked a question to Andy somewhere in there about, GPUs sometimes are hard to get. So,
Yeah.
I'm curious about some, and I don't know myself, but I have to go look about what we're kind of doing to proactively sort of probe these hyperscalers to either make some decisions about knowing ahead of time what's available. I don't even know if that's something we can kind of dig out and kind of. I think you can probably do something like that and have some awareness of, yes, if I use if I scale this for your application, it is going to work, right?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
alternatively, use this other GPU which might not be as powerful, but it's there, or something like that. So
Ryan, that functionality exists. So I was at GTC back in March,
yeah.
and there was a startup in the corner called Brev, and it was just like four dudes standing there, and that was the vibe they were giving out. Like it was just four dudes with
Yeah.
like surfboards as the booth itself. Their logo is like the hang loose sign. You should look them up, but they have something similar where
Okay. Yeah.
from their dashboard you can actually see what GPU availability looks like in specific cloud regions, specific cloud
Nice.
providers,
Yeah.
even AZs. So they have that functionality, or they're working on that. So that was super cool.
Yeah, that type of thing, hopefully they get scooped up and integrated somewhere useful.
Yeah.
But I think that's awesome, especially in like today's day and age. I don't know if there's going to be a time where we have endless GPU available or something like that, but that'd be
Are you
nice.
saying I need to buy Nvidia stock? Like I always feel I'm late, but maybe not that late.
I'll hang on to my 4080 and just hopefully I can sell it one day.
Nice.
It's like,
That's awesome.
all right. So my takeaways, I wanted to loop back to the registry component, right? So
Mhm.
I've seen, I forgot what the startup was or company was, but or project. No,
Mhm.
it was the AKS project, I think, where they use container images to kind
Yeah.
of wrap models and load them into the registry. It
Yeah.
sounds like that's a capability today that's available for loading up models in a registry in OpenShift AI. Also, Andy mentioned shared storage is also a way that they do that, either NFS or probably Object, but they're working on a registry type capability. So I'm really curious to see where especially with Hugging Face and its popularity,
Mhm.
how these sort of registry like or marketplace like AI model integrations surface within things
Yeah.
like OpenShift or even other companies, right? To kind of augment the fact that we're used to working with container registries now, especially in OpenShift and Kubernetes, what it looks like to kind of meld that with sort of a model registry and what kind of information and process looks like. But that's something I'm looking forward to. The other bit was we all kind of had questions when IBM bought Red Hat and what that story was going to look like. But it sounds like
Yeah.
they're doing a lot together, right? Andy
Yep.
mentioned Watson a whole bunch of times, working with OpenShift AI and kind of running it on there, or potentially running on, I forget what he said, but it sounds like they're doing a lot there. So I mean, I would have hoped that was the case, but this gives me a little light at the end of the tunnel to see and Andy talk about it. So that was
You're not as worried about the HashiCorp acquisition by IBM now that you know that they didn't
I
mess
would
it up
think
with
so.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think they've maybe proven,
Yeah.
that they're willing to kind of break new ground or go a different direction or adopt that side of things really well. So at least I hope
Yes.
that's the case.
Yeah.
If you think differently, listener, we'd love to hear your thoughts. I guess so. Come on our Slack and let us know what you think. But this was insightful. Yeah, that's all I had. But pleasure again having Andy on the show. Hopefully, we'll have him on the show again at a later date. But once again, to all of our listeners, thank you for listening. Please share this podcast with people you might know that would like this type of content. Again, join our Slack to let us know what we're missing, episode ideas, what you'd like to hear, or even if you want to be a guest on the show, we're always up for those kind of things. So, yeah, I think that's all. Anything else from you, Bhavin?
No, just a reminder, like all episodes, right? Like rate our show, give us those likes and share and subscribe to our channel on YouTube. But that's it.
All right. Well, that brings us to the end of today's episode. I'm Ryan.
I'm Bhavin.
And thanks for joining another episode of Kubernetes Bytes. Thank you for listening to the Kubernetes Bytes podcast.